Minneapolis, St. Paul, The Fan.
If you want to chime into what's happening with your favorite KFAN shows, you can make your voice heard on the Bradshaw and Bryant KFAN text line. Just let us know what you have to say by texting your message to 64686. That's 64686. Standard text message and data rate supply.
Yeah, some text messages I got. I'm woefully behind it on time, so we're actually going to break in just a few minutes here, and then we'll do some news next segment, get back into the Minnesota Wild, some other things that are happening. The NBA returning from the All-Star break, games starting tomorrow, various talkers there. And I did, whether it was Vikes Bites, it looks like we're going to probably get into that final hour, but there's so much juicy stuff going on, Brett, and I know that you put all of it together, but whether it's the Daniil thing, Florio yesterday has really, and I wish we could have had him on today. We'll have him on again next week, but we talked a bit about it yesterday with PA. The kind of the noise that has been generating over the last couple of days, and Florio doing his reporting work has been a part of it, whether it's the guaranteed cash for Kirk, it's the guaranteed cash for Justin Jefferson. And just kind of a lot of rumors swirling. And there's been some intel that 9 to Noon has been able to kind of uncover in that regard, that maybe the ownership group isn't as opposed to some guaranteed money for the wide receiver as some would report. Maybe the wide receiver's angst or lack of patience isn't as severe as some have speculated or reported on. And maybe that not all is dire as it pertains to the highlight wide receiver. Now, the Kirk thing's interesting. And Florio brought this up yesterday. And again, I think we'll get more into it in the final hour. And text messages, as Brett was asking. I got some on the Wild. A lot of negativity on the goaltending right now. I feel like that is definitely an A topic with this team.
Yeah.
I got some text messages on that. I got a lot of text messages on Grimm offering moral victories for the Hoop Squad. Totally understandable there. But Vikings text messages in the final hour are certainly, we're always opening the door 9 to Noon. And sometimes, you know what we do? We open the door and we ask for those texts and we don't read them. Well, I promise you during the final hour, because Brett's going to keep me as a man of my word, that we will read said text messages. But the guaranteed money for Kirk is a real thing, and it's been guaranteed since the day he stepped foot into Minnesota. And Florio kind of talking about it yesterday, I love the way that he put it, is what is that market truly going to look like? And that's where we get so caught, specifically within our own radius or sphere of our universe in the NFL and any of our local teams, where we're sweating Kirk. A lot of you want him back. A lot of you want him to go away. Well, what is the market going to be for that 36-year-old coming off of an Achilles? Would he accept an incentive-laden contract in 2024 that could potentially become guaranteed in 2025 based on certain parameters of playing time and maybe a statistical standard of some sort that is met this next season? The Vikings need to protect themselves. The Vikings also need to find a QB of the future and the balancing act that takes place there. But Florio kind of floating out there like, what do you really think that there's going to be this massive market? Would the Steelers absolutely be in? They're going to do the competition bit. Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph. They released I think Trubisky a week or so, maybe just a handful of days ago. Now the Steelers, who are these teams that are going to jump in on 2 or 3 year fully guaranteed contracts for Kirk Cousins? All of these teams not knowing the situation and knowing Kirk the way that we do, combined with, so how many of those teams are going to be in on that, combined with how many teams Kirk is going to be comfortable with from an offensive and schematic standpoint and all of those things. It's a hell of a lot muddier as you look at him moving on, really, than I think some of us, including myself, have given credit for. So those are some things that we're going to pop into. This Daniil thing, PA talking about Daniil Hunter yesterday. Among all of this, Daniil's gone. And that is awful for our defensive front as we lament the hideous season that Marcus Davenport wasn't even well enough to give us. DJ Wanham tearing up the quad, back end of the season, what he's going to look. He also, by the way, impending free agent. I mean, all of that coming together, and in the end, we've all just kind of like, Daniil's gone. Or at least it feels like that's the trend, and that's the most. So all of this, again, talkers that never die with the purple. That's where we remain. But we're going to pause now, catch up. We're going to do some news, jump around to some non-Vikings talkers, and then Micheletti is in studio at
KFAN, The Fan.
Welcome back. It is News du Nord, brought to you by The Casino at Canterbury Park. Canterbury can table games all year round. Bingo! On Tuesdays, live racing sometime early to mid-May, returning for the 2024 season. So CanterburyPark.com is the place to go for the schedule and all of that. I just got a text message. No, Daniil Hunter is not. I'm saying, while we obsess over Kirk and JJ and all of these things, in a vacuum on its own, Daniil Hunter's situation, for me, is as dire as either of those others. And it is very much likely, or it's looking to be likely from my standpoint, that Daniil Hunter will be gone. Not today, but by the time his contract expires, I believe that's March 13th in that area, that we have a lot of answers to figure out as it pertains to the defensive front. Where are we going to first, Brett?
Yeah, potentially more on that later. Vikes bites.
So he has been traded.
No, not yet. But more on that later.
He hasn't been traded. He's
Number one.
He's still here. And we'll montage. If we can montage. I got to figure
That's
that
a story
out.
for
There's a
another
lot
day.
of things to figure out here. Everything's fluid at the Fan right now. Except for Daniil Hunter's current status. He's still with the team. I'd like to have him back. Can't have it all. But we shall see. Where are we headed to first?
Number one.
Well, take a guess. We're going to my favorite club, the Minnesota Wild. They fell to the Jets 6-3 the final. It was a game that, it was over for a while, it felt like, even though the Wild scored 2 late goals. They're now 2 points behind the last spot Blues, who, by the way, have a game in hand on your Wild. They travel up to Edmonton Friday to take on McDavid and the Oilers. Just a bad performance, and 0-7 against those top 3 Central teams that you're going to meet in the playoffs. If you sneak in, you're playing one of those 3 teams, and the Wild have not shown any capability of beating them this season. So that's where the Wild are at, unfortunately, right now. Bitter taste in your mouth after the 10-goal performance at home.
Yeah, I honestly, and you're right. Specifically with Winnipeg, they had a back-to-back just before New Year's. And in some ways, it didn't look like they were in either of those games. And so this is, it's not a fun change, but it is a change that this went from a team after the series last spring in the playoffs, where this team can't go one and done. That was what we talked about last spring and into the summer and into preseason training camp and then ultimately the games being played that count. They have to stop going one and done. So bored with it. It's 7 or 8 one and dones consecutively since they last won a series. So that's going back. Maybe it was the Blues series they most recently won. So they won it. They won a series against the Blues, and then they won a series against the Avs. But we're talking about like 2014, 2015, 2016-ish.
Yeah. So let's see
back
here.
In the glory days of the Blackhawks, and it was Kane and Taves and Andrew Shaw licking his lips as he skated around the ice, and Duncan Keith and all those guys, and Crawford. Got to go high on Crawford, and they would oust us in the playoffs seemingly every season. But it's gone from we can't go one and done to now. I think a lot of Wild fans, because at this stage you're also not going to be competing for the services of the number 1 overall pick. I don't know who that name is. I don't know if he's a world-changing generational player coming up in the draft. You're not going to be that bad. So let's get a hockey series out of this. Let's make the playoffs. Let's stand above all of these injuries. Now fans are like, I'd love the ability just to see playoff hockey. They're not talking about winning a series. They just want to get to the playoffs. It's interesting how that change has taken place.
Yeah, there's 2 I'm not in the elite NHL draft mind. There's this Celebrini kid and a Yzerman kid that are kind of above the rest, but more on that later. Also, The last time the Wild won a playoff series was in 2015. They have since lost 7 straight series.
So that's the number, 2015. I think it was against the Blues, right?
I believe it was.
Yeah, 6-game series. Yeah, okay. But, yeah, so people are tired of that. People also want the team in the playoffs, and that's kind of the sticking point. So I don't look necessarily at the situation of they don't match up well against the Winnipegs of the world. I think that the vibe is right now, like, just get to the freaking playoffs and rise above some of the issues. The coaching change, I think they've responded mostly well under Hines, but I'll go back to what I said earlier, and I'll talk about it again with Micheletti around the corner, is the goaltending issue is absolutely text message terrorism. The goaltending issue is something that needs to be watched, needs to be talked about. I got a text message, and I can't speak to this, but I got a text message earlier. Even Jesper Wallstedt is kind of having some trials and tribulations in Iowa right now too. So, that is something that it can't be addressed at this stage, so it just has to be better. So Gus Bus, is he broken down on the road? Does he need some service work? What do we need to get that bus rolling? And Flower needs to step up his game as well. In last night's game, you get the Velarde goal, and then it was bad getting worse. The way I framed it up in the open is it's Velarde's goal in the power play. 14 seconds later, it's Mason Appleton. Then in the third period, it's probably out of reach at this point as Velarde scores on the power play again. But then less than a minute later, you're getting another one in. So the inconsistency there, the goaltending, it's a problem, and there's no room for error at this point. So between Edmonton and the Seattle Kraken, Friday, Saturday, back-to-back, get 2 points there, and then it's a sprint. And the schedule will be in your favor, so handle it.
Number 2.
The Wolves are finally back in action for a border battle against the Bucks Friday. Is it just me, or is this wait just felt like forever? And this Bucks team's kind of in disarray from what I can tell. Every time I open up X or Twitter, I see articles about how they're in disarray and they need more from Dame, and they need more from Giannis.
Well, did you have that? Do you have that audio somewhere from Doc Rivers?
Yes,
and I absolutely love it. The Bucks, and that's when we were talking about it with Grim. The state of the NBA is such. The Bucks have absolutely looked terrible. I think they've lost 7 of their last 10, but they're still mostly tight and secure in the 3rd spot in the Eastern Conference. But they have absolutely been dreadful under new coach Doc Rivers. And if you have that audio ready, here he is kind of talking about it. We were all kind of surprised. Like Adrian Griffin at that point in time, they were either tops in the Eastern Conference or right there with Boston. Boston's been unbelievable. But they're like 30-13, and they fire Adrian Griffin, and they put Doc Rivers in. Even Doc was surprised by it.
Personally, I'll be honest. I told our owners when they called, I said, I think I don't understand why you're doing this, And they said, one of the things they said was, well, it doesn't matter. We've done it now, and we want you. And so that was a tough one. That's where you had the hesitation.
Yeah, by far, and the talker of the year has been by far the worst defense. And I mean, they are in complete disarray of any of the playoff teams. I mean, Indiana has their problems in the East. Golden State technically in the mix in the West. They've struggled defensively. Everyone's scoring a ton of points, it feels like, in the West right now. But to the end, you get rid of Jrue Holiday. That can't be everything. That's a massive problem. And Jrue has shown up for him in big spots in the playoffs, and he is a defensive stud. And he was with the Milwaukee Bucks. But it's not just Jrue. I mean, Chris Middleton has been oft injured the last few years, and now he's just kind of old. Damian's never necessarily been known for his defense, but there's more that goes into that problem that they're having. And Damian also, I've heard him talk before. He's never played with a guy like Giannis, so is there a chemistry issue, learning how to do what he does and mix that with what the Greek Freak does? Certainly there are growing pains associated with it, but it's just been super bad over the course of time in certain spots. But it feels like it's gotten worse since Doc Rivers took over. So, but Bucks Friday night, it does feel like it took forever, and a lot of time we can't get back with that All-Star game from Sunday, but I'm just excited to see the Wolves, man. I'm excited to see, they re-up Conley. That's kind of cool, but that doesn't necessarily impact the here and now. A little more bench pop and scoring, defensively themed team or identifiable defensively is how you would look at the Minnesota Timberwolves at this stage. So, maybe Cat can bring some of that 30 that he scored in the fourth quarter of the All-Star game. Can he bring that into the mix now as we move forward? But down the stretch, well past the halfway point, and it's fun to see what this fight's going to look like. The vast majority of these final games, by the way, at home. So an opportunity for them in that fight to keep the 1 seed in the West. It's just going to be an absolute blast. And I know tomorrow when PA's back, we'll get more into it, and certainly in the Friday Feast, we'll probably even try to have Finch on at some point, one of the next 2 games as well. Get his take not only on the All-Star festivities, but what this thing looks like moving forward for the Wolves.
Want one more?
Yeah, why not?
Number 3.
I saw NFL insider Jordan Schultz said recently Dak Prescott will reset the quarterback market. Is that profound or preposterous? Copyright noon to 3.
I'm not. It's preposterous based on what Dak Prescott has ultimately produced in his career. It is not preposterous at all based on how these contracts go. So it's always next man up, and there's some resetting or at least a matching of the market. And the market right now is going to be, I forget what he's averaging at this moment, but it's high 40s, if not close to 50 as it is. And if he gets any sort of a raise, it's going to be in that same category. And maybe the contract's shorter. Maybe there's more guaranteed cash. I'm still surprised. Maybe I shouldn't be surprised that, we talk about guaranteed money with Kirk Cousins. How come other quarterbacks over the last 5-6 years haven't followed that trend? I'm very surprised by that in some ways, that hasn't become more of a thing. So it's preposterous based on what he's actually produced in terms of playoff wins and success. A lot of regular season wins, but a lot of frustrated Dallas fans in that mix. But he is a good quarterback in this league, and he is young enough that he's going to command a fair dollar, and a fair dollar is going to be a big dollar. And so in that regard, it's not preposterous at all. That's News to Nord with Brett Blakemore, brought to you by The Casino at Canterbury Park. CanterburyPark.com is the website. When we return, Pat Micheletti will jump back. He'll jump in studio here today, and we'll continue the conversation on the Wolves. Dan Hayes of the Minnesota Twins joins shortly after 11 a.m. right here 9 to noon on The Fan.
EA on The Fan.
Head over to KFAN.com keyword contest. Enter for your chance to win a pair of tickets to be there when the MSHSL Girls Hockey Tournament hits the ice today through the 24th at the XL Energy Center. Don't forget you can watch all of the action on 45 TV, the official home for MSHSL tournaments.
Pat Micheletti finishing up some podcast duties. He'll be in studio momentarily. Excited to have Dan Hayes of The Athletic on at 11 to kind of not only get a pulse of what's going on down in Fort Myers, like Buxton's healthy. How's Buxton looking? We'll get some of that. But as you saw it on the Wire yesterday, following it via social media, I found this post, Joe Nelson's bid, Bring Me the Sports, that the owner, Joe Polad, I want to get into that with him as well. Because Joe Polad has, the natives are restless. They are pissed off about some things that they heard. And I want to get Dan's take on it. Now, mostly when I see updates in each and every year, I'm kind of jealous. Like, I feel I'm not a FOMO guy. I do not have fear of missing out on certain things, but spring training almost feels like it's just a nonstop party. Getting updates. Oh, it's cool. It's beachside trivia nights and cool coming of age stories and just the a peek behind the curtain of the Major League Ball Club. And it's awesome. And then that's where the hope selling comes in as well, right? Like obscure left-hander that you hadn't heard about. You wouldn't believe the movement on his breaking ball down in Fort Myers. And then this guy, like what's up with Carlos Santana? Well, we'll ask Dan about that and many other things at 11. But after you beat the Blue Jays, you got a taste of what actual postseason baseball feels like, right? 18 consecutive losses. It's off your back and you're moving on. Life is good again. And albeit you don't get through the Astros, but you competed in that one, right? So there's positivity there. Well, you also had a record high payroll in 2023. You also had a TV deal that has just been the clipping penalty of all clipping penalties, ever to clip, ever to clomp, in relation to this Diamond Sports Group. They're in bankruptcy. You got Bally Sports Regional Network. You got all kinds of partners and affiliates. People aren't getting paid. The Sinclair Broadcasting thing. How in the hell am I supposed to watch a game? Can't get Bally's on YouTube TV. I'm one of those individuals that has had to adapt. And I could tell you about how I've adapted. I'm not sure it's legal. But anyway, you all know of that. But then you hear that, hey, a 1-year, 11th hour candle burned at both ends, that a new deal has been struck. So you're thinking that all is well. But, in some ways, did Pohlad even have to say this stuff yesterday? Let's see here. A couple of quotes with the Twins flagship. The players that are out there right now that probably a bunch of fans are talking about, we're not in the market for those players. There are definitely other players that can have a positive impact on our team that, and he was referring to Derek Falvey, of course, the Pobo, I'm sure is looking at. And in this article, and many of you have done the same thing that I've done, is, okay, you're doing the math. And just understanding whether it's a lemonade stand or it's a multinational corporation, you kind of want that balance sheet, in most cases, if possible, to, at the end of the year, you made more money than you spent. It's like your checking account. We can balance our checking accounts, most of us. So spending has been a constant conversation. The ire and the angst surrounding the team has been related to for years and years and years, is that they don't spend money on winning baseball. And he mentioned those players yesterday. So whether it's Blake Snell, Jordan Montgomery, Cody Bellinger's out there. Third baseman, Matt Chapman. They're out there. Pohlad said, we're going to live where we're at right now. Okay. Well, what are we doing then? That's the question of Twins fans. Are you more annoyed with Velarde into Appleton and Velarde into Monahan? Are you more annoyed by that from yesterday, or are you more annoyed from Pohlad? Essentially telling you, maybe in some ways, that you already knew. But all the same, goes on. I think in today's game, you can see there are a number of different ways to win. You see that both with the Tampa Bay Rays and with the Baltimore Orioles having lower payrolls, they turn out very successful products on the field, also investing in other areas of the business. Well, I got to be honest, Mr. Pohlad, I assume you know this. The fans don't care about the other areas of business. It's one of those things that we know has to happen, but we kind of care about what's happening on the field. The Orioles, by the way, were an awesome story last year and then got their asses bounced. They had no shot in the Major League Baseball playoffs. So Baltimore Orioles fans standing outside of Camden Yards right now are saying, we're excited for this season to see if A, B, C, D, and E can be better, less mirage, more trend in 2024. Orioles fans are foaming at the mouth over how last season ended. So other areas of business, products on the field, that's something that we are doing, he says. But without question, the television situation is having an impact on our business. But beyond that, we're just trying to right-size our business. That goes into it as well. I'm interested to talk with Dan Hayes about that, because that is creating a ton of bitterness. And again, he would go on. What I will say about some flexibility is when Derek Falvey, and his team think there is the right opportunity in front of us, we don't live hard and fast by a specific number. So he's kind of okay. Well, hey, we're not against adding here. Okay, we can have a conversation. We can have some hot takes at happy hour and discuss some free agents. I don't know if Isaac will be there, but Falvey and the Polads will be. But that said, we're not going to spend $30 million on a player right now. So it feels like Twins fans, and I get this sentiment, because I'm kind of on board with this feeling that it's not that the team went all in. They certainly did not. But in some respects, you feel like momentum is lost, because you're immediately, in some ways, making that concession, and you're walking that back, the momentum that was built last year, and you're kind of putting a complete halt on it. And you make the investment that gets you excited in Carlos Correa, and 5 more years, 35-ish million per year. How does Carlos feel about it? And all of those things that go into that conversation. So text messages 64686, booth at KFAN.com. We're open to all that kind of conversation, but that's going to be some of the framework of chatting with Dan Hayes during the final hour about 15, 20 minutes from now. But in studio, fresh off the podcast into the broadcast, we're live here, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry I'm late.
Long-winded was it with Gorgie?
Yeah, it was with KG.
How's KG doing?
Buddy, he's great. Yeah, he's great. And we had a good chat.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I apologize.
That's fine.
I'm never late for you.
No,
ever.
You're not.
And
that's why I'm watching you through the glass.
I know. And I
having the most incredible conversation
I felt bad,
of your
but
life.
I get long-winded sometimes, so it's on me. I owe you.
The roller coaster of the hockey team, Pat Micheletti. We're going to make the playoffs. Nobody's going to stop us now. Go to Winnipeg last night.
Yeah.
How do you vibe? How does all that jibe with you?
Well, it's really, to the fans, today is sad because you lost. And that's what you have to kind of fight through, and that's what they have to fight through. You're not going to win every game. Unfortunately, they're in a position where they have to win, and they can't have 2 losses in a row or 3 losses in a row, because then you're going to be right back. And that's why I've been telling people it's so hard when you have to jump teams, and you're thinking, you're scoreboard watching, hoping, Vegas, because Vegas is set. They're in the playoffs, and they're playing home against Nashville, and they lose. Yeah, and you're hoping for a Vegas win, and that's the problem of where Minnesota is, as well as they've been playing. That a loss kills you.
Yeah, it does,
and it's disappointing. And I said it the other day. I think I said it with you. They really can't consume themselves looking at other teams because they have to win.
They'll go nuts doing it. Yeah,
they'll go nuts doing it. And, they got to play out the rest of the 27, 26, whatever that they have left, and just see where they end up.
And I'm glad you mentioned, a loss kills you, but I've felt it as a fan really over the last week, where I'm watching these games with the urgency of a playoff game in some respects, where
everyone
I'm hypersensitive to the bad moments. I'm hyperinflated with the good moments. And, situation now, as ugly as yesterday was, they can go to Edmonton and Seattle. They can get 3 or 4 points out of that mix, and then picture that conversation into next Tuesday when they come home, and I think it's Carolina. That's how teeter-tottering this thing is at the moment.
And you can get depressed because you can look at what their record is in the last 10.
Yeah.
and say, what?
Right. As good as they've been, they got 3 points closer.
We were 2 out. Now we're 4 out or 5 out or, whatever. All that hard work, all that, what they're putting into it and have nothing to show for it is tough on fans. It really is.
Yeah, it is. And
who want the team to win and
I was talking to Brett about it, and I know where Brett's coming from, and he's definitely not wrong, but it's the team is flipped from a year ago. It's like these one and dones have to stop, win a freaking playoff series, move on. There's no excuses for it. It's kind of flipped to the point now where people are begging for a playoff.
I know.
I wouldn't mind because he's right. The Wild they're not matching up with superior teams very well. As cool as Monday was, they've had trouble with Winnipeg. The Dallas always, it feels like in one way or another, has their number. You mentioned Vegas, and it was a cool win in Sin City after the Super Bowl, but all the same, when we get to the springtime and the games are really grinding, I like Vegas in those matchups. But all the same, it's like at this point, I just want a playoff spot and a chance to complain about them getting swept by a superior team in the postseason.
If you talk to Bill Guerin, and he's been on plenty of times with different hosts and stuff, from the beginning of the year to now, he believes in this team, right? I mean, he thinks that they're good enough, and they have shown signs in certain games that they're good enough. They go in and beat Tampa, they beat Florida. They can beat good teams.
Yeah, we'd be a playoff team if we were in the East.
No, we wouldn't. But my point is that what the problem is with this team is that you can't have the 1 or 2 good nights and not the 10 good nights.
Yeah,
and that's the problem.
That's the position they're in.
Their bottom 6 is not performed.
It's been mostly
to the
dreadful.
level that he expected them to perform on a nightly basis, and so I think that's been a big issue with them this season.
So looking at the Western Conference as it is now, it is just the one spot. It's going to be the Blues. Now, how have the Blues
or Nashville
or Nashville in the mix? And they have I think Blues have a game in hand.
Calgary's right there. They're only a point behind. I mean, they're starting to play well. I mean, the Blues have not played very well at all. So when you look at their lineup and you say, they may be a little deeper than Minnesota, but whatever. But you still have to win the games. The Blues did the Wild a favor the other night, losing at home to Toronto, and so I mean, is it still there? Yes, it's still there. But
don't give up, Pat.
I'm not giving up.
Don't give up.
I'm not giving up because if they do make it, it would be very impressive.
Okay.
Let's say that, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be impressive?
It would be
to come from where they were, jump 5 teams, and nab that last playoff spot. But there's a lot of work to do.
Patrick Micheletti at PatMick2626. A few more for you here. I've been hammering on the goaltending.
Yeah.
On the 2 or 3 times that we've broached the topic thus far, 9 to noon. Am I being too hard on that situation in terms of, I think Gus Bus has really generally been unreliable.
Yep.
And that's a real concern. And Fleury just hasn't been good enough in spots. If anything, Fleury's kind of did this last year a little bit too, and then things elevated themselves as we got closer to the playoffs. So maybe it's just Fleury's Fleury at this stage, but it just hasn't been good enough for a team that also, as you mentioned, has to be good, not 1 or 2 every week, but every night for weeks.
I go back and forth because every goal is not a bad goal, but people think every goal is a bad goal.
Oh yeah,
okay. But if you watch Gustafsson lately, and I'll give you an example. A beautiful goal by JT Miller when he walked around Bogosian, flipped the puck from his backhand to his forehand, went top shelf and beat Gustafsson. I thought, it was a pretty goal to watch. It was not a good goal to give up because I think in that particular instance, Gustafsson was not ready. Okay?
Yep.
And to explain it, I think Gustafson thought, yep, Bogosian's going to rub him off, and puck goes in the corner, and we go from there. I think when JT Miller went around him, made the move, first of all, Gustafson wasn't ready. He was too far back in his crease. So what's that going to do? It's going to give you more room.
Yeah.
He didn't come out and challenge, right?
Yeah.
And so that tells me he wasn't ready. Because if he comes out and challenge, well, that gives little or no room or time for Miller to flip that puck over his shoulder and top shelf, right?
Yeah.
You just can't. Your hands aren't quick enough if a goalie's coming out to challenge. And that I did not like that goal, for example. And there's been a few of those that really put you behind the eight ball.
Absolutely. Edmonton on Friday night. What are we looking at with those guys? You just giggle.
Yeah. Well, they're on a roll. I mean, they're on a roll. And from what goaltending problems they have, it doesn't appear that they have those anymore. A lot of people thought, that they're going to have to make a move for a goaltender. I think they're actually going to try. I think they're actually going to try to get Jake Gensel, who's an unrestricted free agent at the end of the year, even if it's for a rental.
Don't you think that the Oilers are a good example of they, as on a roll as they have been, they're 13 points behind the Canucks?
Yeah,
so,
but remember how bad they were?
No, absolutely. But my point is as
and
good
they
as
won
they've
17 in a row.
Correct. As good as they've been, that trip back upward has not been as extensive as one would think, given how good they've been. That's what I mean in comparison to the Wild.
That's the point that needs to be made, right? And but no, they've been. McDavid is playing at a level that is ridiculous. Right up there with McKinnon.
He's not bad.
And Draisaitl and they're getting scoring from more lines. That's going to be tough. Although Minnesota's played well in Edmonton in the past, Brodin has a tendency to shut down McDavid, and Brodin is healthy again. So I don't know. Every game is so important, and it's going to be a challenge, no question.
Thanks for hanging out with me.
I feel bad. I apologize for being late.
No, it's fine. The person that you are, the athlete apparently that you are as well. Not apparently, that you obviously are.
Duh.
All of these things make it forgiven.
You're the best. I appreciate it.
That's Pat Micheletti, Beyond the Pond, Minnesota Wild fan line, Beyond the Pod, and Gorgie's Pod, which in this particular case took precedence to 9 to noon, but that's okay because I love Patrick. I love KG at Pat Mick 2626. We head down to Fort Myers and chat with Dan Hayes of The Athletic on the Minnesota Twins next. At Final Hour, Nordo and